All right, let's talk about sex. We all think we've got it pretty much figured out, right? But what does the science actually have to say about it? Today we're going to look past the basics and uncover some genuinely fascinating and honestly pretty surprising truths about what happens to our bodies.
Yeah, we're moving way beyond common knowledge here. We're talking about what researchers have actually measured, everything from the immediate physical reactions to some unexpected long-term health links. So what's the real story behind it all?
To really understand the science, you kind of need a map. And for decades, the go-to model for researchers has been what's called the sexual response cycle. Think of it like a blueprint for all the physical and emotional changes that happen.
So this cycle breaks the whole experience down into 4 distinct phases. It all kicks off with desire, which builds into arousal, hits its peak at orgasm, and then winds down with resolution. Now let's dive into what's actually happening inside these stages.
Okay, let's tackle a big question right away. During that arousal phase, when your heart is pounding and you're breathing heavy, is sex actually a major workout? People joke about it all the time, but what does the data really show?
Well, what's fascinating is this conclusion from a 2008 study. They actually monitored people's blood pressure and heart rate in real time and found that the physical stress isn't nearly as extreme as you might think.
To put that into perspective, for a healthy adult, the physical toll is often compared to some pretty mild or moderate exercise, like, say, climbing a couple flights of stairs. It's really just a short burst of activity, and the body tends to recover pretty quickly.
So, the peak has been reached, and the body moves into that final resolution phase. But this cool-down period, it works very, very differently for men and women, which brings us to a super common question.
This is probably one of the most well-known differences in the whole sexual response cycle, and the answer is all about a very specific physiological state.
It's known as the refractory period. For men, it's basically a built-in recovery time that can last anywhere from a few minutes to, well, even a few days. And while some women might also have a brief moment where they don't want more stimulation, they generally don't have that same physiological barrier, which is what makes multiple orgasms possible. Now, we usually think of that resolution phase as being all about satisfaction, relaxation, that afterglow, right? But it turns out, for a pretty significant number of people, the emotional experience can be the complete opposite.
Just take a look at this number for a second. 41%. What on earth could that possibly mean when we're talking about sex?
That's the percentage of men who've reported experiencing something called postcoital dysphoria, or PCD. It's this phenomenon of feeling inexplicably sad or irritable after sex. It just goes to show you the male emotional experience is way more complex than it's often made out to be. And this chart breaks it down even more. So while 41% have felt this at some point in their lives, about 20% of the men in one study had experienced it in just the last 4 weeks. This isn't some rare, obscure thing, it's actually quite common. Researchers are also finding some pretty clear links between PCD and other factors, things like current psychological distress, a history of abuse, and even certain sexual dysfunctions. It's a really clear sign of how deeply our emotional and sexual health are connected. Okay, so we've looked at the immediate stuff, the physical and the emotional. But what if I told you that the science also points to a really surprising long-term health benefit for men? Let's zoom out for a minute. Here's another number for you. 21 or more. On a monthly basis, what could that possibly have to do with your long-term health? Well, the answer comes from this massive long-term study out of Harvard that followed over 30,000 men for years. They were looking for a link between how often men ejaculated and their risk of developing prostate cancer.
And this table shows the core finding. They used men who ejaculated between 4 and 7 times a month as the baseline. But get this. Men who reported 21 or more ejaculations a month had a relative risk of just 0.78. In the world of medical research, that is a significant reduction.
To put it another way, that's a 22% lower risk of being diagnosed with prostate cancer. That's a really substantial and pretty intriguing finding, don't you think? And here it is, stated as plainly as can be in the study's own summary for patients. The researchers themselves concluded that a higher frequency was associated with a lower risk. Now, the exact reason why is still being investigated, but that correlation is incredibly strong.
So, from a physical event that's like climbing some stairs to a complex emotional aftermath and even a potential long-term shield against disease, the science of sex is just constantly revealing new layers. It really makes you wonder, what else is there to learn about something so fundamental to our lives?